My next patron question is from Trevon, who wants to know how different the history of Pixar would be if both Joe Ranft and Steve Jobs were still alive. So two key figures that were pivotal to the growth of Pixar and are sadly no longer with us are Joe Ranft and Steve Jobs. Jobs would help start Pixar when he bought Lucasfilm's computer graphics department from George Lucas. And even though he lost a lot of money during the company's early years, he still tried to keep it afloat as best as he could. When Pixar eventually got the go-ahead from Disney to make a full-length feature film, Jobs was involved in contract negotiations and later on had disagreements with Michael Eisner over said contract, which almost led to Pixar making films for other studios. This would eventually be smoothed over when Bob Iger was appointed CEO of the Walt Disney Company and made a deal with Jobs to buy Pixar. After Disney bought Pixar in 2006, Steve Jobs would become Disney's bigger shareholder. He would also join Disney's board of directors and apparently did help in a lot of areas, primarily technology-driven. He would sadly pass away in 2011, leaving quite a legacy behind at both Apple and Pixar. The fact that he kept with Pixar and saw its potential even as he lost millions of dollars a year is certainly something. Many other people would have probably bailed out after a few years. His role at Pixar was mainly in helping with the technology and investments rather than getting involved in the creative decisions of the filmmakers, although he would still sit in on the occasional meetings and give possible suggestions that they could use or not. For example, during the early development of WALL-E, the original idea was to set it primarily on any rubbish-filled planet. According to Pete Docter, it was Jobs who suggested that maybe that planet could be Earth. While he was known for mostly staying out of the way of the creative team, if you watch him in interviews, he's clearly very knowledgeable about the history of animation and how it works and the importance of creating a strong story to go along with the visuals. He genuinely cared that the films produced by Pixar would be ones with well-crafted stories and characters. After he sold the studio to Disney, he was apparently less involved in meetings there, so I don't know how much input he would have had if he had not died. And how would he have reacted to the news about John Lasseter and him eventually leaving Disney and Pixar? Interesting enough, the person who would afterwards hire Lasseter to run his animation division was David Ellison, the son of Oracle CEO Larry Ellison, one of Steve Jobs' closest friends. I think, though, had he not died, his influence at Disney and Pixar would have been more on a corporate level, and it's difficult to know what direction he might have steered Bob Iger and Bob Chapek's decisions. While Jobs handled mostly the financial aspects of Pixar, Joe Ranft was key in steering a lot of the studio's creative choices. He was heavily involved in the story development for Pixar's first 4 feature films, and he played a particularly important role in Cars, co-directing and co-writing the movie. His outgoing personality was also said to be a major influence on the character of Mater. His influence even stretched beyond Pixar, as he was one of the principal writers on The Brave Little Toaster and The Rescuers Down Under, was a story artist on a number of Disney animated films, and was the story supervisor on The Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. He even suggested Tim Burton to make a stop-motion animated film based on the Corpse Bride folktale, eventually receiving an executive producer credit on the movie. Joe Ranft was involved in so many people's favorite animated films, but he would tragically die in a car accident in 2005. He absolutely made his mark on the movies he worked on at Pixar and would probably have continued to do so had he not died. Cars 2, for example, might have gone in a different direction. It's possible he would have directed the film instead of John Lasseter, and the final result would have certainly been different. He probably would have offered story suggestions to the other later Pixar films, so those might have been tweaked in certain areas. Maybe he would have pitched an original idea of his own that he would have directed, and we would have gotten another wonderful Pixar film to add to our list of favorites. And as I said, his storytelling skills impacted more than just the movies at Pixar. He might have decided to help out with the films at Walt Disney Animation Studios. He had a particularly strong working relationship with Henry Selick, so Ranft could have contributed to Coraline and Wendell and Wild. Ranft also might have kept John Lasseter's more notorious micromanaging style at bay. At one point, Selick was developing a stop-motion animated film at Pixar titled The Shadow King, but Disney eventually decided to drop the film. Selick revealed some years later that Lasseter interfered heavily with the story, which affected the production. Maybe if Ranft was still around, he would have protected Selick and worked on the story instead of Lasseter. He was also the person who brought Brenda Chapman to Pixar and maybe could have convinced Lasseter to let her make her vision of Brave. These are all complete speculations on my part, but when you look at Joe Ranft's career, it's difficult to deny the significant role he played in several major animated successes, and he would certainly continue to do so later. Both him and Steve Jobs will always be missed. Thank you for your question, Trevon.